Today we're going to talk about institutional reforms. There are two topics we're going to be covering inside institutional reforms. One is reform of education and another is reform of prisons. For education, before the reform, few areas had public schools. These schools were more common in New England. Teachers in the schools were poorly trained and poorly paid. Wealthy parents sent their children to private schools or hired tutors at home. Most children simply did not go to school. One reason is that they did not have enough money. Another reason is that parents needed their children to go to work. In the cities, some poor children were stealing and destroying property. Reformers believed that education will help these children escape poverty and become good citizens. The person that led the reform in education was Horace Mann. Born on May 4th, 1796 in Massachusetts, his parents were poor farmers, and because of that, he didn't get a lot of school time, but he was determined to study hard. His determination paid off because at the age of 20, he enrolled into Brown University and graduated in 3 years as valedictorian of the class of 1819. Mann was practicing law until he was admitted into the Massachusetts House of Representatives, and he served from 1827 to 1833. Then he joined the Massachusetts State Senate and served from 1835 to 1837. Then he was appointed to Secretary of the newly created Massachusetts Board of Education. And then after that, he served the United States House of Representatives from 1827 to 1833. Mann created the Common School Journal to get his ideas to teachers already in the field. He also helped build normal schools to train teachers. Mann lengthened the school year to 6 months and made improvements to the school curriculum. He also helped create the Board of Education in Massachusetts. By the time of mid-1800s, most states had accepted Mann's education system. Mann and his fellow reformists did many things. They were able to build more schools and libraries. They made sure those schools were better equipped. They doubled state aid for schools. Salaries for teachers were increased, and training for teachers were increased also. However, this new school system did not offer everyone education. If towns did allow African Americans to attend schools, which was very rare, most of them had to go to separate schools that received less money. And even though females were mostly not allowed to enter high school and colleges, they were able to make some progress. In 1837, Ohio's Oberlin College became the first college to accept women, in addition to men. At the same time, Mary Lydon founded Mount Holyoke, the nation's first permanent women college. Some reformers focused on teaching people with certain disabilities. Thomas Gallaudet developed a method to educate people who had hearing problems, and also opened the Hartford School for the Deaf in Connecticut in 1817. At the same time, Dr. Samuel Hall helped people who were blind. He developed books with large raised letters that people with no sight could read with their fingers. Hall headed the Perkins Institute, a school for the blind, in Boston. Now on the topic of prisons. The early prisons were local township jails that were seen as housing facilities for those who awaited trial. Putting people in those jails were not seen as punishment, but instead something that came before the punishment. The punishments were usually depending on what crime they committed. This included execution, fines, torture, or banishment. If a person was confined for a significant amount of time, they were usually sent to workhouses. Living conditions were terrible and the forced labor was very hard. In 1682, Pennsylvania was the first to use confinement as punishment for criminal offenders. The death penalty was only allowed for cases involving murder. Punishments for other crimes consisted of fines and labor in correctional facilities. By the late 1700s, prisons were in a terrible state. They were dangerous, filthy places where inmates were tortured or made insane. There were also prisons for people who were in debt, even if they were in debt for only $20. However, because they were in prison, they could not gain the money, and they were in jail for a long time. Also, children accused of minor theft were jailed with adult criminals. The fight to have better conditions in prisons was led by Dorothea Dix. After one day in 1841, when she went to teach Sunday school at a jail and witnessed that many inmates were in horrific conditions and that insane inmates were in even worse conditions. Dorothea wanted to find out if conditions were as bad everywhere else, so she traveled to hundreds of jails and prisons throughout Massachusetts. Then she advocated for better treatment inside prisons and asylums. She brought the situation to the government of Massachusetts. She also went to other states to convince them to help with the situation. She helped open 15 hospitals for the insane and improve supervision of penitentiaries and asylums. Effects of Dorothea and her fellow reformers were remarkable. They were able to create new special mental hospitals. They were able to create a new system to deal with children in trouble, and they created the House of Corrections, where education replaced punishment to help change inmates. Also, they made state governments no longer put people in debt in prison. Dorothea helped a great deal with insane and mentally ill people. Most people who were judged insane were locked away in prison cells that were even worse than normal cells. And if they misbehaved, they were whipped. Massachusetts had one private asylum or hospital for the mentally ill, but only the wealthy could afford to send a family member there. Dorothea saw what was happening, and when she gave her report to the Massachusetts state government, they were shocked and voted to create public asylums for the mentally ill. Dorothea and Mann helped fix problems that were harmful to many people across the nation. Education in prisons would not have been the same without them.